Okay, once again, good morning, happy Friday. Thank you for joining another session of Azure Power Lunch. As a quick disclaimer, this call is being recorded and we will place these recording on our YouTube channel. And by the way, this call is joined by Microsoft team members as well as our customers and partners. So if you don't want to be recorded, you can drop off now. So today's topic is about the latest Logic app updates from build 2021. Um, quick thing, as you know, Azure Logic app is our solution for workflow in the cloud. It's a PaaS service which allows you to create workflows in the cloud. It's a no-code solution. You don't have to write any code. You can just build those workflows. Let's think of this way. If you can think of a if your application or your solution in the form of a flowchart, you can use Logic Apps to create it. Very powerful solution. And there are some very exciting updates that has happened at build timeframe. So, which have build was, if you don't know, it was I think a week ago, last week. So, what are some of the things? So, first of all, Logic app now can be run in a containerized runtime. So, for example, you can run it. You don't have to, rely on running it in a consumption manner as creating a Logic app in Azure and running it. You can run the same runtime on top of Azure App Service or function runtime and things like that. And that's opened the door to some really excellent possibilities. So, for example, the customers who wanted to have integration with their VNet, who wanted network isolation, since Logic apps can now run on app service or function, and the premium function plan, as we know, they can do VNet integration. So all of those things are now available as a part of this offering. There is a new SKU introduced. It's called Logic App Standard, and that SKU provides the flexibility and ease of deployment and all those things. And we'll talk more detail in a second. There is a Visual Studio Code extension. They have when they did a preview, they have an extension, but now they have upgraded it, and it allows Visual Studio Code has become a first-class citizen for local development of Logic apps. So you can develop Logic apps just like you do it in the portal. You can do it in on-prem. So, the customers who wanna kind of follow the best practices of kind of doing CI/CD and all that, they can develop on-prem and then push them into Azure through their CI/CD pipeline appropriate process. There is also something that has, and by the way, this plan has gone GA. So Logic App Standard R is now GA. Okay. Um, they have in addition to that, they have a stateless workflow. So as we know, um, previously Azure Logic App workflows were stateful. So if something happens in a workflow and it stops, you can start it and possibly from the last kind of a successful state, or you can because it's a safe state in number of scenarios. In the stateless workflows, there is no state. So uh, that are useful when you are not concerned about the transaction, but you're concerned about the throughput. So you want to run at a very high rate, maybe thousands, hundreds of thousands of transactions per second. In that case, that scenario, that's where this will fit in. And finally, there was a challenge with the designer. They have revamped the designer where if your workflow becomes really large, it was becoming unmanageable, and they have fixed that issue as well. So let's look at the different SKUs that are available and let's talk about it and what is our context for discussion for today. So there are three SKUs. The first one is Logic App Consumption. This is a multi-tenant SKU that has been there since Logic App, you know, has arrived. That SKU basically allows you to create one workflow per Logic App, and that the charges are consumption, basically pay per use. Very good in certain scenarios, but in certain scenarios, a more enterprise focused scenario where VNet integration, where resources have to be accessed from on-prem, where you have to follow kind of a certain security guidelines, that's where that SKU wasn't very popular. Then came the last one, which is the integration service environment. This is very similar approach to app service environment V2, where you have a VNet injected service that runs your Logic app. Some of the pros are now you have VNet integration. Now it's running inside the VNet, so you can access resources on-prem and things like that. Very powerful. But at the same time, the con is it was a bit uh, deemed expensive because if in the scenario where you have a few logic apps, you don't have many logic apps, in that case, that was expensive because you have a dedicated kind of a set of dedicated instance that you're paying, and that's because you have to pay a fixed cost for that dedicated instance. So that's why there were some concerns on that. This standard SKU, which is in the middle layer line, that actually addresses, as I said, a lot of the customers' concerns. It is running on app service instance. There, if you um, uh, look at and we will look in the creation experience, you will see a new SKU workflow service 1, 2, and 3 that is available to support this Logic App standard. And since the underpinnings are Azure Function and Azure App Service, so all the things, as I said before, like VNet integration, private endpoint, all of these things are in play. And just keep in mind, just like app service and function, there are two ends to or two sides of logic apps. One is a front end, that is when, let's say, if you have a logic app that has an HTTP trigger, you are invoking that logic app. So that has to be secured through private, it has to be made private through private endpoint. On the other hand, there is the VNet integration piece, which is basically the backend of the logic app, where it may be calling storage, it may be calling on-prem services that you make VNet accessible by connecting it to a VNet and VNet, which is VNet integration. So that's same way you do app service, same way you do logic apps.
Naveed, sorry to interrupt. Are you
Go ahead.
sharing your? We see
Yeah.
presentation, but if you're sharing the demo
No,
portal, we
not
don't
yet,
see you.
not yet, not yet.
Oh,
I,
okay.
I will, I will, I
Just
will. Yes, no, thank you.
just wanted
Yeah, I
just to
will,
make
I
sure.
will show it to you in a second. So that's definitely. So right now, I'm just sharing the screen. So this is the SKU. So this is workflow service 1, 2, and 3. This is the tier. This is basically same tier as premium SKU of app service. Okay. So right now, the hosting is available only on Windows instances. So that's what you see here, workflow service 1, 2, and 3. And we will, once we go through a demo, we will take a um, look at that as well. So I think that's a good point. So let's quickly jump into a demo. So so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a logic app. This is let me go into my resource group. Come on. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go into marketplace and simply need to type logic app standard, and this comes up, and here we go. So let's start creating it. So this is some things are usual, like logic app, I mean the resource group. The thing is you have to give it a unique name. Oh, by the way, this is important. And right now we are covering just the publish as workflow. There is something called Docker container. That is if you are deploying your logic app in to an Arc enable Kubernetes cluster. Okay, that can be on-prem, that can be another different cloud. So that's in that scenario. We will cover it in a separate session. We briefly talked about it, Azure Application Services and support for Arc for Azure Application Services. Azure Application Services are namely functions, app service, logic app, API management, and event grid. So these services you can deploy on prem. So that's in that scenario. In this scenario, let's not worry about it. Let's just focus on workflow hosting. This is hosting in the workflow uh, service as a workflow standard. Okay. So this is a storage account. This is pretty much standard. You have an app service or function. They always have a storage account. I already have a plan created. So that's the plan. Let's say that if I want to create a new plan, let's test one and let's see what it looks like. So this is the option workflow standard one, two, and three. These are different SKU sizes, and once again, you can change them if you want later on or now. So let's use the SKU that we already, the service plan that we already selected. And same rule applies to what we have for app service. Like you can have multiple app service sitting on the same app service plan. Same thing. You can have multiple standard logic apps sitting on the same same plan. Okay. Um, any questions? Uh, so okay, that's good. So and by the way, monitoring, this is once again app service insight. So at that moment, you can click, review, create, and it in a minute, it will create that particular logic app. Okay. So while it is creating that logic app, I'm going to show you some of the existing logic apps. So this is an existing logic app. And by the way, one of the advantages that now you can have multiple workflows per logic app. So before you can only have one workflow per logic app in consumption. In standard, you can have multiple workflows per logic app. So let's see if it's still going on. Um, so the way you uh, basically the way you do it, you go in and you go. Oh, by the way, this is the one: stateful and stateless, low latency versus high availability. This is the standard that you wanna follow. Let me see, it's still deploying. Give it a second. So let's create a workflow. We call it APL simple HTTP. We're just gonna create a simple HTTP workflow. So once we do that, this workflow is created, it's stateless. So right now there is no activity in that workflow. And you can click either directly on the designer or get started and it will start creating that. By the way, just keep in mind for standard um, uh, workflow or the standard logic app standard, only these triggers are available. Okay, if you remember, if we have the logic app consumption, you have a number of other triggers like a email arrived in an email box or a file added to SharePoint and things like that, or third-party triggers. Those are not available. These are the only triggers at the moment which are available. So we are going to use HTTP. So when an HTTP request arrives, and it needs a schema. I mean, you have to provide a schema to better understand what message is coming. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this sample JSON for this to generate the schema. So it's going to generate the schema. Here it is. And the next thing we're going to do, we're going to keep it really, really simple. And we are going to return um, just an HTTP response. And in the HTTP response, we are going to basically create a string expression, and we are going to add hello, and we are going to put here basically the dynamic content, which is name of the person. That's it. Okay, so that's what we are doing. We're going to save this. Once this workflow is saved, what's going to happen is it will generate a URL. So let's go into the overview, and you see this is the workflow URL. That's how you can access this. So we're going to copy that, and we are going to go into our REST client. I mean, you can use Postman. I'm just using this one. And with that, once I try it, so it just returns. So, and by the way, one thing, if you remember, whenever we used to run Logic App workflows, you can see history of runs. If you have a stateless workflow, by default, no history will be, you will see no history. What you have to do is you have to enable the debug mode, and then once you do the execution next time, then you will start seeing the history. Okay, it takes a second for this to enable. So let's wait for it. And once that is enabled, then we should be able to debug it. Okay, in the meantime, so a number of organizations, as I said, especially large enterprises, they wanna kind of access on-prem resources, and they wanna go through VNet integration to do that, access resources in a VNet. At the same time, there are um, um, at the same time uh, there are kind of they want to access these workflows over private IP. And so for that scenario, we will look at some of the I mean, some of the changes that we have to make, some of the updates that we have to make to meet that scenario. Any questions so far?
Naveed, I had a question about the hosting. Is it possible to put an app service and a Logic app in the same plan, or do they have to be
Yes.
separate app service plans?
No, you can put in the same apps, remember, but there has to be a premium plan.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yes, you can put both a Logic app and app service on the same plan. But as I said, it has to be a premium plan. Okay. Okay. So let's go quickly back on the presentation, and I am now presenting this slide. So this is the reference architecture. This is the architecture for the scenario where you don't want any. So what customer says that, okay, I want to block all internet outbound from my subnet and from my VNets because I don't want any data exfiltration to happen. Because I don't want somebody to running some malicious code in my subnet and start sending my data over internet to their kind of a resource or storage account or anything. So I want to block all of that. So this is the scenario that is kind of I'm showing this is possible with this architecture. We have this Logic app running WS1 running on an app service host. This is the Logic app host basically. We have attached it, integrated it to a VNet and subnet inside a VNet. So that's the dedicated subnet. All connections. So basically, as you know, Azure App Service uses a storage account to store file to share of to create a file share and to store some of its metadata. All of that. So you have to create 4 private endpoint. And I'm basically these are the steps I have outlined in the slide deck. You have to upgrade that plan uh, to a V2, the storage account plan. You have to create 4 private endpoints, one for each blob, file, queue, and table, and attach it to the same VNet, and of course in a different subnet where your app is integrated. you have to set these settings on the logic app standard. And at that moment, and by the way, just you can set this deny outbound on that subnet as well. So all outbound traffic is denied. Once you have done that, then you will have create an isolated instance of your logic app, which has no connectivity to internet. But just keep in mind, it comes with a price. You cannot use any Azure connectors. You can only use the connectors that are available as a built-in connector that are available with um, with Logic App. Okay, and I know it's for a minute it seems like, oh my God, I mean I can't use any connector. What will I do? You have a Swiss Army knife in your possession with um, with Logic App, and that Swiss Army knife is HTTP connector. You see that this HTTP connector, basically you can call any service as long as it is accessible over HTTP. You know, you can do set up headers, query string, body. At the same time, you can send cookies and you can set authentication. So as long as if that service supports any of these type of authentication, basic client, um, Active Directory, raw, managed identity, you should be able to uh, access it based on you know based on that particular authentication. So that is very powerful. So I don't want to diminish the fact that there are so many useful connectors in Logic App, but at the same time, you should be able to access those resources. And what you will have to do is you will have to use then a firewall to kind of unblock those outbound FQDNs or IP addresses. So you can do that, or you can use NSG if they are just the IP addresses. Okay. Any questions? So now let me show you kind of an end-to-end solution that we have I have created. So let's me go into here. So this is a logic app that I have created, a workflow, and this is doing, as I said, let's go into designer to see what's going on here. You have HTTP trigger, then what you're doing is you're calling key vault. So this is, I am calling HTTP, using HTTP to get a secret from key vault. And key vault is also connected to that particular VNet through a private endpoint. So there's a private endpoint. I've dropped the private endpoint in the same VNet, and I am using managed identity. So in the key vault, I have set up an access policy giving Logic App access to that key vault. Okay, everybody with me so far? I know there a number of things, but the point is all connectivity is happening over private IP. There is no outbound over the internet to this key vault or anything. Okay, so with that, yeah, so once that is, once you have this, so I'm getting, sending a request, um, basically invoking the workflow through HTTP. Then I am over HTTP, I am getting a secret from key vault, parse JSON. If you're not familiar with this activity, this basically kind of parses a JSON file and give you named value out of that. And then you have the response, which is basically the response of the request that initially started. So this is sending back to the caller. With that, so let's what we're gonna do, we're gonna go back. So now I have a virtual machine that I have deployed in the same VNet that is where the Logic app is running. And I have created a private endpoint for that Logic app. And let me show you this. So if we go into this Logic app, this is networking. And by the way, I like this new screen. It clearly tells you this is the outbound traffic. As you can see, it is VNet integrated. Inbound, I have a private endpoint. So I cannot access this Logic app over I mean, from public internet. This is the inbound address. Okay. So let's go back here and let's make a call to this logic app and see, let's take a second. So yes, so this is the um, secret that I stored in the key vault. The point is you can build workflows. You can now access resources or inside a VNet, or if you have connectivity to on-prem using site-to-site VPN or ExpressRoute, you can access resources from on-prem. At the same time, you can make your workflow private. So you can only access it over a private IP address, just like I access this workflow here. And that's why I have to use this desktop, sorry, this kind of a virtual machine that I'm running in the same VM as Logic App. Okay, so that's kind of uh, that's how end-to-end scenario work with the Logic App, where you have secured the backend or kind of make the backend private by VNet integration, front end using private endpoint. Okay, any questions? Okay, one other thing, of course, application insight is always available, and you can access all that information, like all the data from application insights. And one thing you will see is managed identity, system managed identity or system assigned identity will by default is on when you create a logic app standard. It is on. So, I mean, you can turn it off, but this is on and you can use it to get access to other resources. So, yeah. So, any questions, comments, feedback? Let's quickly go back to our screen. So as you can see, I have allowed outbound traffic to Azure Monitor. This is to support App Insights. That's pretty much it. And one thing I want to show you, this is how you create this workflow on-prem. So, you have to install um, this extension. There is this extension. I'm going to show you. Logic App. So this is the Logic App standard extension you have to install, and you have to have the latest function runtime running. And then what you can do is you can go in here and you can create a new project. And give it a second. Yeah, create a new project and it will allow you to create a logic app on your local machine. And once you have created the logic app, you can easily switch to designer, just right click on that and say open in the designer. And it will open the logic app in the designer. Okay, here it is. So basically the same design experience that you have in Portal, you have it here. And once you're ready to deploy, you can go once again to Azure, same experience that you have seen with app service and function. You can use the same thing to, to push it to logic apps that you have in the cloud. Okay. So I know we are a little bit over time. Any questions?
Naveed, real quick, I'm sorry if this was on the chart that you shown. Is there a limit on the number of workflows you can have on a standard logic app? Or
That's
is
a
it
good
only
question.
limited by the
I
resources?
I think there is a limit. I'm not aware of it, but you can check Azure resource limits. So I mean, that's where if there is a limit, there should be
Okay, thank you.
that. Yeah, sorry, I don't remember it. Yeah. Any other question, folks? Okay. Thank you very much for joining, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend and see you next week for another session of Azure Power Lunch. Stay safe.